If you tell somebody you are a cancer patient, they can't actually heal the cancer. If you tell somebody you are an extremely healthy individual, that 0.1% of your cells are representing a cancer in your body, suddenly it changes wait, I'm 99.9% healthy. The interesting thing about spontaneous remission is never something that is achieved. It is something that is received.
What we're running away from is how powerful we are, how accessible peace is. At the same time, understanding that peace is the highest vibration in terms of consciousness, even more so than love and joy.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human podcast. As usual, we have amazing guests, and today we have two guests. We have Zach and Eva Dalak. We are going to have an amazing conversation around sort of what's going on in the world today, health, sickness, and what really goes on when it comes down to that inner conflict. So, Zach and Eva, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on, Greg.
Pleasure. For the audience, you probably know a lot about Zach, and we're going to give him some space to talk to us a little bit about the work that we do or he's doing. And Eva, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about yourself and some of the work you're doing with the audience as well. But with that said, Zach, why don't we kick off with you? Why don't we jump right into it? Tell us a little bit about what you're focusing on and what you're sort of spending time and working on today.
What I'm up to today is really an iteration of my journey through academia. So I was 17 years in academic medicine, training as a medical doctor, and then a couple of subspecialties in internal medicine, which had me in ICU care, and then endocrinology and metabolism, which got me into drug development and chemotherapy and treating cancer through some novel mechanisms of understanding the relationship between energy that's produced by the microbiome and the mitochondria inside humans and the occurrence of cancer. And that took me ultimately to this point of breaking my relationship with academia, realizing I was running on the wrong premise in this current Western medicine paradigm where I was being trained to use drugs to treat diseases. It was a patient of mine that finally brought the fallacy to the forefront when she was the first patient admitted to my first clinical trial for my chemotherapy. And so I had these 6 capsules that I wanted her to swallow to become the first patient to take this novel chemotherapy, which was quite safe. That was one of the exciting premises of the chemotherapy, is it was not a poison. It was actually a nutrient delivery to the cancer. But she was understandably very nervous. And, to be the first patient in any clinical trial makes you nervous. So I was trying to reassure her. And then she asked this potent question of, what do these 6 capsules have to do with the reason I have cancer? And that suddenly landed 17 years of work and, a house mortgage worth of school debt in the trash. And somebody was like, oh my gosh, I have spent these 17 years with the wrong premise, because there's not a single case of cancer that's ever occurred due to a lack of chemotherapy. And so as you fast forward another 15 years later, what's happened is that I've started to understand that cancer never attacks a healthy body. Neither does an infection. These are symptoms of a deteriorating function of the organism. And when we set out to create a war on cancer, we never solve the problem. We end up perpetuating damage to the larger organism, such that while the cancer might disappear for a moment, their overall health has declined after a run of chemotherapy, surgery, radiation. You've basically poisoned their body and irradiated their body, cut them open. You've done so much damage in the name of war against cancer that you don't realize you've set them up for death from an alternative cause or whatever. And in these last 50 years of cancer trials, we've come to find out that we never change all-cause mortality. No matter what you do to a patient coming in with cancer, the population dies at the same endpoint, the same amount of time. We've never really prolonged life by doing chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. We can change the way in which they die. Instead of dying from breast cancer, 20% of them will have remission of the breast cancer and they'll die of something else. But they don't actually change their point of death. And as I exited the academic environment, started to understand the human condition within the context of nature, realizing cancer is not a cause of a lack of chemotherapy, or not caused by, it's actually caused by environmental disconnect from nature. And with that mindset, started to look at all social and human systems, realizing, wow, we are repeating this pattern of this warlike mentality against the symptom rather than addressing the underlying cause. And so this is where we find ourselves today. And my work with Eva, being an extremely exciting iteration of this, is realizing that the human condition is actually universal. We all have a systemic disease that I would call an abandonment disorder of nature. And it's in that break in the psyche of the human that we think that we are outside of nature, that leads to a system of scarcity in our mentality, leads to a system of ownership to sequestration of power, colonialism, and ultimately war. And so when we then try to look at war as a phenomenon, there's a victim and there's a perpetrator, and then we try to save that situation, we actually perpetuate the victim-perpetrator triad there. And so what Eva and I and our teams are starting to work on is, what if we collaborate to create a new container where we start to understand global peace in the same way that we understand global health?
So if I just paraphrase that, the more peace we have, the healthier we're going to be as humans.
Or perhaps the healthier we get, the more peace we have. It's a slight iteration of that, but the healthier you get, the more impossible it is that you have cancer. So the premise of the new pathway to peace would be create an environment in which humans are functioning that makes war obsolete. This is what we ended up doing in my clinic, is create a condition of health in the individual that makes their cancer obsolete. Instead of trying to attack the cancer, raise the vibrational energetics of the entire organism, and then the organism is self-healing. And we call that spontaneous remission in medicine, where suddenly somebody with, stage 4 cancer, brain, bones, all riddled with tumors, and then suddenly they go into a moment where they suddenly feel better. And a few weeks later, they're like, no, doc, I'm really, really better. No more nausea, no more bone pain. Finally, the doctor's like, all right, well, we're going to rescan you, and everything is gone. And the exciting thing about spontaneous remission is that there is no evidence the disease was ever there. If I get somebody to recover from cancer through a war against the tumor, there's scar tissue, there's a hole in the bone where the tumor used to be, there's real evidence of all of the damage done. In spontaneous remission, where you've raised the vibration or health of the entire organism, there's no evidence the disease was ever there. Not only the tumor's gone, there's no hole where it was, there's no scar tissue. It's a reversion or a return to the original design that body knit itself together with in the womb of its mother. And so this is what I hope for humanity now. At this moment where we bring ourselves to our knees biologically in a great extinction event, at the moment where we have wars raging all over the world, genocides and the rest, is there an opportunity in this malignant state of human behavior to go into a spontaneous remission and not only stop a war, but have no record that the disease occurred? How do we do that? So that's my real interest.
Talk about a purpose-driven statement, right? Talk about, going out and doing the right work. I'll share with you, my father lost his battle with cancer. I'll never forget this. He went through chemo and radiation, and he was a very sort of, I might describe him as a tortured soul, right? Very, very trauma, deep issues, carried it for a long time, right? We might argue very great man in some aspect, but very, very tortured soul in the other. And I was just chatting with a friend, literally, he called me last week and he was like, I got to let you know, I've just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and it's spread to the liver. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm going down chemo and radiation. I was like, bro, you do realize there is a completely different world out there that if you're willing to lean into and if you're willing to explore a little bit, not to take away from the medical advice that you're getting, but, I would kind of look at that. And it was interesting because I could hear it in his voice. There was just like almost this dismissiveness, like, yeah, no, fuck off, bro. Like, don't even talk to me about that. So, and everywhere you look right now, everyone has cancer. And when we look around the world, everyone is in conflict. There seems to be a war everywhere, right? Which brings us to you, Eva. Tell us a little bit about the work you're doing, because, that's also, mind-blowing stuff.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Zach, for sharing this beautiful experience. So I grew up as Palestinian in Israel and born and raised in a conflict zone, then worked most of my life in conflict zone, mainly in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. And what I came to understand with peace activation that I found it at the wake of October 7 is actually that inner peace is the road toward peace, that we cannot actually we cannot really fight for peace. We need to activate peace from inside out. And the only way we do it is through having self-awareness and understanding that we are all trauma bonding and we're all competing on who's more victim and competing on suffering. And we need to move the discourse somewhere else. And I came to it through this a lot of work around community-driven reconstruction after genocide, after war-torn, after a lot of situation and environment that is very toxic. And I've seen it throughout my years, whether in conflict zone or outside, whether in a community or on an individual level, is how actually, unless we're able to raise our vibration higher, we're not able to see the possibility of peace. Peace become a bad word in a way. Right now, if you talk about peace in Palestine, Israel, it feels like an insult considering what's happening right now there. The beautiful of the container that Zach and I are co-creating together is like, how can we take this example of what's happening with cancer on a body, on an individual body, into a society, and understanding that what we're seeing, all the wave of rage and hopelessness and helplessness, is people riding the wave of what's happening in Palestine, Israel, because they're not addressing what's happening inside of them. People are having cancer because they're not addressing the trauma that they have inside of them. And trauma are linked to the 5 wounds of our human soul: abandonment, rejection, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And unless we address that, we will develop cancer. And when we will develop cancer, we will develop war, because we don't want to address the fact that it's actually starting inside. And I remember I came to spiritual psychology like 13 years ago, coming out of a peacekeeping mission in Ivory Coast. And I remember the first day I was in this school, University of Santa Monica, and I'm like, these people are nuts. Like they have no clue what's happening out there. Out there, there's a conflict. Like, and they're talking about like what's happening inside of them. Like this is a luxury. This is a luxury to talk about how I'm feeling. And I realized by the end of it, oh my God, it's actually the conflict that I'm seeing outside is a reflection of what I'm experiencing inside, except that I'm not able to access it. And so I need to project it outside. And unless I'm able to acknowledge it and have this self-awareness, I'm not able to deal with it. And that's where the cancer kind of expand within my body. So it comes first energetically. I'm not understanding the lesson. It's going to come into my body. I'm not understanding the lesson. I'm going to die. I'm going to go through a process that confirms my own irrational belief that I'm helpless and hopeless. And actually, I'm sovereign. And what we're running away from is how powerful we are, how accessible peace is. At the same time, understanding that peace is the highest vibration in terms of consciousness. Peace is the highest is the highest vibration on the map of consciousness, even more so than love and joy. And so it's something that feels unattainable and unimaginable. It's like it's an utopic place. And what Zach and I are challenging people to think outside of the box is like, no, peace is possible, but it actually takes you activating it inside of you. Just like healing from cancer takes your own awareness and your commitment to your own sovereignty, taking sovereignty over your body, over your belief, over everything that created originally the root causes of your cancer. This is what we're going to be dealing with, is like what created actually the condition to have war. That's why making war obsolete is like tackling the environment that allowed even this war to happen, which is isolation, separation, victimhood, and ignorance. There's so much ignorance and misinformation that allow what's happening right now and polarization of society into 2 camps. Either you're with them or against them. And if you're with them, then you're against me. And this polarization doesn't allow for a field in between right doing and wrongdoing, like Rumi says, where we can actually meet. And this is the meeting point. The meeting point is coming outside of this narrative and stepping into something, into the unknown, something that we don't know how it would be. Just like when you step into your healing your cancer, you're stepping into something maybe irrational, but that has the potential to heal you.
You know, and this is for the skeptics and some of the audience. I want to ask a couple questions. So one, I want to make it more tangible. So when you say high vibration, what do you mean? Let's explore what that abandonment trauma is. But before we go there, I want to ask a question, because I have this as an opinion, which is I think we've become more polarized since the pandemic, right? And that started with COVID, right? Vaccine, no vaccine. Now we're in politics. Are you left? Are you right? Like, do you think there's been an acceleration in like these separate sort of sides and being so polarized when it comes down to different groups and parties? And I'm sure media doesn't help either, right?
I think media, but also the separation. We are, if we're talking about the core wound, the abandonment, we have been, we perceive that we're abandoned by nature, but we have abandoned nature. So we have disconnected from our own nature, and we feel like we're operating as we are isolated. And what COVID did is increasing this isolation and the separation, and there's no connection. We are interdependent being. Like we thrive on our connection. Everything, if you look at nature, we are like in a web of connection. And during COVID, interestingly enough, I actually lost my eyesight. I couldn't, like, at the break in January 2020, I lost my eyesight because one of the things I had in vision for my vision for 2020 was to have peace in the Middle East, where compassionate self-forgiveness would be the weapon. And I had the opportunity, I would call it an opportunity, because every crisis is dangerous, but it's Wei Ji, it's danger and opportunity. It's the Chinese word that has, in one word, have this polarity of danger and opportunity. And I had the opportunity to actually go and see from within how peace look like. That's why I'm saying this is like a vibration. This is like a consciousness that is the high. Because for 2 years during COVID, I didn't see. I was blind. And I was able to sit in meditation and go through a deep healing process. And I'm describing this healing process in my upcoming book, Dancing in the Dark, where I could see and touch and feel how peace would look like. And when Zach and I speak about like the container that we want to create, we're taking through a framework that is composed on 3 different levels where we're touching the wound. We're not ignoring what's happening in Palestine, Israel. Absolutely not. We're touching the local wound. But from the local wound, we are bringing it into a bigger context of the global wound, which is with the Earthrise Collective that bring a wisdom keeper from all around the world that have gone through generation of genocide and healed and used actually compassionate self-forgiveness as a weapon. And from there, we go into the planetary container, which is what Zach and his team are bringing on, which is like, how does this all disconnect to nature? And I think Zach can expand more on this, but this is like, we're taking it very, very concrete from the core wound that I perceive as the vortex of conflicts right now to like the planetary healing that we are right now. I feel humanity is ready for because of the chaos and because of the conflict.
That was going to be my question, which is like, is humanity even ready for this? I mean, you know, what you guys are describing here,
I want to say you're part of humanity. Are you ready for it?
Right, yeah, I mean, yes, but I mean, what I'm thinking is like, how do we get there, right? So when we talk about healing, like, where does one start? You know, I think, you know, if it's as simple as someone's got sort of inner turmoil and conflict, all the way up to these wars and these like major conflicts. Where does this begin? And Zach, maybe this is a question for you, which is, how does one begin this healing journey, and where do they even start?
Yeah, for what we've learned over the years in biology, a lot of it coming from my hospice work. So after I left the university, I was a hospice director for 4 years, and I was admitting 80 patients a week to die. And in that journey, started to realize that this is the space that spontaneous remission was seen for the first time in my career. I hadn't seen spontaneous remission in 17 years of ICUs and everything else. And suddenly in this quiet space at home, when you're told you only have 3 weeks to 3 months to live, there's something about that container of, oh, okay, I'm going to set down the drugs. I'm going to set down all my external pursuits. I now understand that I'm dying. I'm going to come into myself and I'm going to really experience life right here. I'm going to live each day to its fullest. And suddenly 10% of patients, and you're admitting 80 a week, and so 8 patients every week have to be discharged, because as soon as they go into that prognosis of you are dying, they let go of their ironclad grip on their fear of death, and they start to live. And so I think this is where we're at as humanity. So is humanity ready? Yes, because we are dying. We are now collectively on our hospice bed. We are now below the extinction level of birth rates in most countries around the world, United States included. And so we went under the extinction line of fertility in 2018. And we've been steadily going down since then. And so, Japan is leading the game. China's right behind them. So we have massive populations of billions of people that are going to go extinct due to a lack of procreation. And some of that is social influences, education, et cetera. But a lot of it has to do with just a complete failure of biology. And so infertility is now becoming the norm for individuals from age 20 to 50. And so we've got this incredible burden of disease and failure to procreate that's pushing us towards this hospice moment where we're realizing, wow, we only have a couple hundred years left at best. It could be a couple of decades at the rate of acceleration of these diseases that we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. Like you said, with the cancers alone, like the cancer rates and the sudden death of cardiovascular disease, everything else that's happened since 2020, the medical community was completely unprepared and couldn't have conceived that this was possible, that things would change so much from 2018 to 2022. And so that 4 years like just really shook us up, which was, to say a lot, because we'd already been through the last 30 years, which was this acceleration of chronic disease that we could not have pictured when I started my medical training in 1992. 1992, the leading cause of a primary care doctor visit was low back pain. By the end of the 1990s, it was chronic fatigue syndromes, chronic pain syndromes, failure to thrive, multi-organ failure, cancers, autism, attention deficit. Like these primary care offices were being flooded with diseases that we didn't even have 10 years earlier. And so despite that, 2018, we still could not have imagined a further acceleration of that, which happened by 2020, 2021. And so we are in this logarithmic rate of disease and death in what used to be our healthiest population. The deaths in individuals from like age 25 to 55 went up like 400% in a couple of years. The term life insurance companies were going bankrupt, and were getting bailed out because they hadn't built into their actuarial tables the possibility that 25 to 55-year-olds could die at this rate. That's where they were making all their money. That's why term life insurance is cheap when you're young. But suddenly those young people that weren't supposed to be, creating a bunch of healthcare costs were creating massive costs and dying. So this is kind of where we're at right now as a humanity, is we end up on the hospice bed. And so now we have an option: keep our head buried in the belief that there's nothing wrong and that nothing needs to change, or come to the realization of like, wow, we got to stop all the drugs. We have to stop the economic drugs and addiction. We have to stop the consumerism that drives that. We've got to stop the wars that drive our economies today. The United States is addicted to war because we have such a weak US dollar that if we're not perpetuating military spending, we can't meet our debt coverage for the US debt. And so we're addicted to everything from consumerism to war now to drive an economic machine that's completely decoupled from nature and human biology. The birth rates are going like this and GDP is going like that for the last 35, 40 years. And so we uncoupled economy from nature and biology decades ago. And that's landed us in this situation with a 10,000-fold increase in the extinction of species and our own biologic collapse. So are we ready to change? Only when we are realizing that we are ready to die.
Yeah. I'm thinking like, I don't know if it's an option to be ready, right? We might just have to. But you said something, there's money in war, there's money in treating someone, not healing someone. So it's almost like the system is rigged. How do we compete against that? How do you take that on? How do you start to shift the entire system?
In some ways, it begins with the individual. So this individual container is very interesting in that when we take people through the 7-day immersive experience, what we're doing is helping them understand why are they addicted to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And you're taking
to drama.
Addicted to the emotions, addicted to consumerism, addicted to, distraction economy of social media. So that addiction lies at the root of addiction lies in abandonment disorder. So alcoholism, drug addiction is all rooted in abandonment disorder from our childhood.
So what just for the audience, what is abandonment disorder?
Abandonment disorder is a phenomenon of the neurology of a human. So when a human suddenly feels abandoned by its mother or its nest, the safe environment, if it suddenly feels abandoned, it goes into a fight or flight state at the neurologic experience. And from that, you develop an increased sense of the need for the ego. And so by age 5, we're being trained into this abandonment disorder. We're pushed out of the household and said, you need to go to school 8 hours a day. We can't handle you. You're a crazy 5-year-old boy that doesn't want to sit still. You're going to school. You need to sit in that chair for 8 hours. And if you can't sit there and focus, then we're going to tell you have a disease and we'll put you on adrenaline. We're going to put you on speed. And so here's Adderall for a 5-year-old boy who doesn't want to be sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day. not only did they get abandoned by the household, they got abandoned from nature at that moment as well. So they're feeling this deep disconnect of like, what's taking care of me? I'm put into this hostile environment of 35 other 5-year-old children that are all now in a fight or flight state, all sharing in a collective abandonment disorder, all trying to learn as quick as possible how to use the ego effectively. And so it's bullying on the playground. It's these little things that are happening at the individual level from this deep neurologic reaction to the belief that you've been abandoned. And it begins, unfortunately, in today's society at the moment of before your first breath. Biologically, you get cut off from the nurture of mother at the moment that the umbilical cord is clamped. And so we have this weird diseasification of birth right now in Western medicine. We no longer believe that the mother has been nourishing that child for 9 months in the womb by some sort of miracle of nature. We instead think, my God, we got to get that child out of that mother as quick as possible. We got to isolate the child from the mother so it's no longer sucking nutrients out of the mother. Like we have this weird lack of trust at the fundamental level of birth. So clamp that cord before the child is usually even taking its first breath. It's experiencing a complete cutoff of the nourishment that it's been receiving that allowed it to self-organize in its mother's womb. So at that moment, the child has a fight or flight state that's deep in the subconscious state of the neurology. And so Western medicine has managed to diseasify life from the very first breath. And so it's very easy then to program that being with external stories of abandonment or that reinforce its neurologic experience of disconnect from mother. And so this is this pattern that starts to unfold at the first moment of life and then is reinforced very quickly as they move into social systems and into these abstract systems of metrics of success. If you can sit there for 8 hours and answer a multiple choice test, then you're smart. Probably not. But this is the sort of thing that we've been programmed in with.
Man, when you describe it, it makes so much sense why we're fucked up.
Yeah, it's amazing we're
when we look
alive,
at
honestly.
right, like when you look at the world today, I mean, it's like you step back for 5 minutes and you're like, what are we doing? What are we thinking? Like, this can't be normal. So, Eva, maybe this sort of brings it back to you. So, in the work that you do, same kind of question: where can we begin to start to work on that inner peace, raise what you describe as that higher vibration?
I think the first step is listening. It's really, we have like such a lack of attention and stillness in listening to what's happening inside. Listening to oneself, but also listening to the other. Like one of the main practice on which peace activation is founded already as soon as like October 7, like in October 2023, is I opened the Zoom room and I brought together Palestinian, Israeli that have just come out of the trauma of what happened on October 7 and other international that were really caught in the fire. And just in a practice of listening, each person was sharing how they felt. The main prompt was, how do you feel now? Not how you felt yesterday, not how you feel tomorrow. It's how do you feel now? And how can we listen to the other person sharing their emotion without interacting, without asking questions, without rephrasing, without reacting in like, oh my God, I feel the same. None of this, just like holding sacred space in silence and observing our own trigger. And I can tell you there was a lot of trigger in this room. Just by listening of how Israeli have experienced October 7 and how Palestinian have experienced that even before October 7, that October 7 for them was the continuation of what has been happening since 1948. But at the same time, because the prompt and I was holding the container very strongly, is like they couldn't react to each other. So there was no space for competing narrative and competition of suffering. And by listening to the other person's sharing their own perspective, their own story of their own emotion, not a narrative, political narrative of a party or of a tribe or of a, or religion, just like how I, Eva, or how I, Ahmed, or how I, Dalit, are feeling right now, it had brought so much healing to the person to say, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that this person can experience it this way, because from my perspective, this is not what's happening. And even that's what they would share with me after the call, because they weren't allowed to share that during the call. So just like 1 hour, imagine a container where people are just listening to each other without going into the story. And then taking that experience into like a more trauma-informed process where people are using a triad, speaker, listener, and observer, and just noticing how we get into the judgment and listening, getting into this story of like, oh, he said that, so this mean this, and that's what happened to me when my mom did that or my dad did that, and so it triggers inside of me the abandonment issue that Zach was talking about, the rejection from my father, my mother, the other sex, the rejection from the system, how I feel humiliated by what's happening, and how do I take this individual experience and put it on a national narrative that then I can use. And I think that what's happening right now is like such a betrayal, a wounding of betrayal, and that we're like fighting over who has more justice, or how can we claim peace without justice, and how can there be justice without peace. And what we're proposing is like, if we have this awareness, this self-awareness of the me, then we can go into the process of the other as a reflection of me, and from there me to the we. It's like, how can we design a process that move me into a communal process of coming together to understand that what's happening here is not happening between Palestinian and Israeli. It's happening between humans. And what we're wanting to create is beyond this religion, is beyond this identity. And we need to step out of this identity to understand that we are being invited into owning and taking responsibility for our emotions. And emotions are energy in motions. And as such, if I'm not dealing with them, and if I'm not taking care of myself while and recuperating, claiming my power, I'm going to get cancer. I'm going to die. I'm going to go through this process that Zach described, but it starts with the emotion that I didn't deal with in the first place. And that's where it's come together.
You know, coming back to cancer, I've actually had a couple people on the podcast. One, his name is Dean Hall, brilliant dude, diagnosed stage 4 cancer, given a timeline. And he said to his oncologist, he says, how long do I have to F around with my own experiment in healing myself before I have to go through the protocols that you're suggesting? And the doctor said 6 months. And he went and he spent 6 months in nature, and very specifically swimming in cold water, and a very specific type of forest. It was called, he talks a lot about something called forest bathing. Fast forward the conversation, 6 months later, cancer-free. I had another friend, she's also Israeli actually, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and she wrote a book about this, which was all about being optimistic and happy. So everything she did had to be positive, right? It was, her book is titled Aggressive Positivity. And it was like when she had to shave her head, she made a party about it. And like there was dancing, and she went to people and said, listen, I love you, but I can't talk to you for another year because every time I see you, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? And I just need to have positivity around me. And same story, right? Like cancer free. And her doctor actually wrote the foreword for her book, right? So back to what you were talking about, Zach, which is this, spontaneous
Remission.
remission, right? What I hear you talking about, Eva, there as well, which is like part of the answer in curing our disease. And Zach, you're talking about this is curing ourselves, our mind, our soul, our spirituality, our self. I still think it's an uphill battle, by the way, if I was going to be a little judgmental, right? And I know, as we described, what we tend to do is when we listen to people, we could listen to them through that judgment. But I mean, this is a vital work, and that's where I asked you the question earlier. I'm like, do you think we're ready for this as humanity? And I think to what you did answer is like, yes, we are, and I don't think we have a choice for that. But now, how do you get the message out? How do you get people going through this kind of work? And that kind of leads us to the upcoming events and projects that you guys are working on. So tell us about that. Why don't we start with you, Zach? Tell us about the upcoming event in November.
So we're beginning this journey into what we call an immersive experience or experiential learning for a group of humans that are going to be going through this journey together in a 3-envelope container. And so in the inner envelope, you have the individual, the hyperlocal, which can be literally a single person or the individual community that's been traumatized and is in this conflict zone. And so we begin in November with a cohort of 60 people that will go through this journey together. And the facilitators, Eva and myself and a few others, we'll be holding this threefold container: one for the individual, one for the global container of witnessing, which is our indigenous wisdom keepers around the world that have been through, peoples of genocide, peoples of deep conflict for generations, finding their way into this radical forgiveness, radical self-realization, and how they've done that as a people group. And we've got individuals from South Africa running that project, but there's representation from Rwanda all the way up to Ivory Coast, all the way out to First Nations in North America, to South American Mayan individuals and things like this. So you've got this deep experience holding the global perspective on how you go through this remission of the victim perpetrator, savior triad. How do you resolve that? And then that's put into the third container. And so it's a 7-day immersive experience for these 60 people. And it's really the 3 months leading up to that moment and the 3 months of integration and application coming out of that experience that will build a new template for this process in which we make peace obsolete instead of peace the paradigm or polarity to war. And so making war obsolete is really the goal of that journey. And so we'll be doing an iteration in November and then doing another deeper dive with a group from Israel Palestine in 2026, so that we can use that current deep wound as a focus group on how we make this human transformation happen. And what we find in medicine over and over again is that if you keep trying to avoid the pain and the wound, if you keep withdrawing from it, it never heals. If you're willing to go into the pain, find the antidote very quickly. And the fresher the wound, the more potent the healing is, the easier the healing is. And I want to make this point because I think there's a big part of the human mind that is faced with cancer and be like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing I'm ever going to do. Or we need to create peace on earth. That's going to be the hardest thing we've ever done. And what somebody finds out who goes through spontaneous remission is it was the easiest thing they've ever done. The hardest thing they ever did was create the cognitive dissonance and the biologic dissonance that led to the cancer in the first place. That was an exhausting journey of doing all of the things that didn't make any sense in their lives, following other people's metrics of success and failure, and putting themselves into deep stress states of abandonment and all the other things that would layer on top, being addicted to drugs and alcohol and everything that led to the liver cancer, whatever it is. That was the hard part. The interesting thing about spontaneous remission is never something that is achieved. It is something that is received through this phenomenon of surrender. And that is a hard thing to do when you feel like you are a victim or you're in a place of power as a perpetrator. It is hard to suddenly move to surrender. And so that's where these bigger containers are critical. To move there, you have to help the individual come out of their psychological identity as the wound. If you tell somebody you are a cancer patient, they can't actually heal the cancer. If you tell somebody you're an extremely healthy individual, that 0.1% of your cells are representing a cancer in your body, suddenly it changes. Wait, I'm 99.9% healthy. And so these larger containers, global, and then the planetary biologic containers that we're holding Israel Palestine in ultimately, is for them to start to realize they are not Israeli, they're human. Their Israel-Palestine conflict came from a deep abandonment story at the human level. And suddenly they realized, wait, I'm 99% healthy and I've got this 1% of me that's got a story that's become my dominant identity. And so I see myself as Israel as a polarity to Palestine. And so this is where we get this powerful synergy, I think, in these containers that we're putting together.
And I would just add, like, another aspect of it is the movement that I have in Palestine, Israel. We just created this like one where we are connecting on the humanity of Palestinian Israeli that move beyond our identity, whether it's religious, ethnic, race, gender, and understanding that, I always say, like, I've been working in the conflict field for the past like 30 years, and I say conflict prevention is victim of its own success. We never know that we prevented conflict because we put in place the environment and the processes and the system that doesn't allow to conflict to erupt. And so it's the same thing that what we're referring to in creating new type of environment where war is obsolete, where conflict doesn't have any reason to exist because we are sovereign being and we have the choice. And our choice is whether we're going to claim our sovereignty and humanity over these identities, narrative that are locking us in victim, perpetrator, and savior. And we've all been in one of these roles. It's not like one identity or one nation is just like one or the other. It's like we've all been into this three role, and that's the drama. And peace activation, we say like stop the drama to heal the trauma and activate peace. We cannot activate peace if we're still in the drama triangle of the victim, perpetrator, and savior. And we cannot activate peace if we don't tackle the trauma, this energy that got stuck in our bodies and is triggering us every time we hear this narrative or that narrative.
At such a subconscious level.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Actually at a physics level, which is very interesting to me. So we launched the Institute of Natural Law a couple of years ago. It's a nonprofit that's really advancing the understanding of what natural law is as a fundamental unifying philosophy of sociopolitics. No matter what your political genre, you can be communist, you can be capitalist, you can be socialist. Natural law runs within all systems, and natural law is, once understood, it creates a new uniform philosophy and language by which we can communicate. And when communication occurs, you dissolve the warlike or isolation that leads to the warlike, cancer-like mentality. And so natural law is very interesting that it has three premises. Once everything within the system understands itself to be sovereign, meaning it cannot be owned by another, and it can only be harmed by its own permission. And so everything is sovereign. As soon as you achieve sovereignty, whether you're an element of nature like sodium or a human in social systems, the sovereignty immediately leads to polarity. And through that polarity, it needs to exercise what's called the law of attraction. So sovereignty, law of attraction, and polarity are the phenomena that you see at every level of nature, from an atom all the way to a molecule, to a cell, to human systems. And the issue that we're facing as humans right now is we lost sovereignty for the abandonment disorder. Let's think about sodium for a second. Sodium has never needed a contract or a peace treaty with chloride. Chloride is its opposite. And so sodium, by the nature of being a sovereign element, will attract chloride from wherever it is in nature, and it will immediately create something greater than itself, which is salt. And so this phenomenon of salt occurring spontaneously from the polarity of two complete opposite things is how nature works. But if you break sovereignty, then suddenly your opposite is not seen as your greatest gift or your element of completion. It's actually your opposition. And so polarity switches to opposition when you break sovereignty. And so this is a very simple equation at the end. You want to solve Israel-Palestine, you need each individual to realize themselves to be sovereign and free of that 1% story that was keeping them locked in a victim-perpetrator savior triangle. And so sovereignty is the beginning. That's where we begin. You asked that question, where do we begin? And so we begin in sovereignty. You have to experience that at the emotional level, at the psychological level, at the level of simplicity of your safe nest, whatever it is. And then you have to realize it at the community and social levels. But sovereignty leads to the law of attraction to the balance of polarity. And so what we could find very easily is that the Middle East is going to be the new superpower economically in this world if it chooses to be. It's going to have to lose the story, and it's going to have to lose all of this oppositional belief system from its lack of sovereignty. But the West has been actually perpetuating that weakness in Saudi and the UAE and Jordan and Yemen and Qatar. And like the West is actively, and you can go to the CIA or anything else, like we've been actively targeting that part of the world for years to create a situation where they could not step into sovereignty. Therefore, they would remain in opposition to one another rather than come into polarity. If this part of the world will step into sovereignty, and Israel will recognize Palestine as sovereign, Palestine will recognize Israel as sovereign, they suddenly will create sodium chloride. They will create a very coherent and balanced system in the context of a greater Middle East, North Africa, that's quickly becoming the energetic epicenter of the planet again. Economies all rushing back there again. Africa and the Middle East is the economy of the future. The US dollar's collapsed, Asia's collapsed, China's collapsing, Japan's gone in a few years from population collapse. China's disappearing. The only place where we have population growth is along that corridor. It's basically from Africa, Central Africa, up to India. And so that Africa, Middle East, India corridor is where all of the energy planet is consolidated right now in its next rebirth cycle. And so if this part of the world will step into sovereignty, I am quite confident that polarity is going to happen. Opposition goes away. And that gets me excited.
I forget who said it, who quoted it, and I'm going to butcher it as well, but maybe you've heard of it, which is something along the lines of man will never have peace until the man-made laws align with the natural laws. Is once that happens, that's when we hit a different plane. And forget who quoted that and what the exact quote was. I'll look it up later. But as you were talking, I was thinking about that. Right. I wish we had more time, but for the audience, Eva, let's start with you. If they wanted to learn more about you and get in touch with you, how can they find you?
EvaDalak.me, peaceactivation.org.
All right, amazing. We'll have that in the show notes for the audience as well. And Zach, obviously you're quite easy to find on Instagram and some of the other platforms, but where else can people get in touch with you?
The main portal is zachbushmd.com. That'll get you into my whole ecosystem of nonprofits and for-profits and everything else going on there.
Amazing. With that being said, we're coming to the top of the hour. The last question is the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow? So, Eva, I'm going to start with you. What do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
Take care of ourselves, really, our inner world, and activate peace inside.
Amazing.
And it will radiate outside.
Amazing. Amazing. Zach, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
I would say tuning. We have a symphony of life within a human being, and right now we are stuck in a anthropocentric or human-centric, perhaps narcissistic viewpoint of we are a species outside of nature. What we in the last 30 years of science is that human beings are the most complex ecosystem that nature has created on this planet. There's more microbiology diversity. There's more diversity of life inside of a human being than any other organism on the planet and any other sector of nature. And so the diversity within my colon dwarfs the diversity per cubic centimeter in a coral reef or the rainforest. And so we are literally the most complex, most interconnected, and therefore most intelligent system that the earth has created. And when we step into that, understand that we are not against nature, we are actually the most embodied state of nature that's ever been created. So we need to change our identity from one in opposition as a single species to a container for many species. And nature is speaking through us and has never been against us, or we would not have been here in the first place. And so we are the amalgamation, we are the co-creation of nature itself. Our intelligence is nature speaking for herself and not humans against nature. And so it's that shift in identity and then realizing this tuning is possible. We can retune our song and move away from story, maybe to song. What happens if we lose the human story of abandonment and start to sing again together? And what we've seen in biology is that every spiritual practice in regards to song or chant increases longevity. It turns on stem cell activation. It increases telomerase. And so it doesn't matter if it's a Black Baptist choir in the South within the United States or a shaman chanting in the South American jungles. Those turn on our biologic activation of regeneration and healing. And so we need to go from storytelling to singing, perhaps, as a species. And in that tuning, we may find the symphony of humanity. And maybe the only thing that goes extinct in the end is our inhumanity.
I totally agree. I'm thinking of two things. First, as you said, the number one thing, or number one contributor to longevity is song and laughter and community. And you reminded me of the movie Avatar, right? If you've seen Avatar, it's exactly what you're describing, right? Which is being connected with nature. We might have to do a part 2 to this, but for the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, don't forget to share. Zach and Eva, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the work you're doing. I don't think there is more important work to be done, and to have you two leading the charge is amazing. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Greg.
And to the audience, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you next time.